My parents kept breaking into my apartment, so I moved without telling them, and I let them face the police. That day, the day I understood just how far they would go, was not when everything collapsed. It was the moment I realized the walls of my supposed adult life were made of glass. I came home to lights I never turned on, blankets shaped by bodies that were not mine, and the lingering scent of food I had never cooked. Every corner of my one bedroom overlooking the Denver skyline whispered that I was not living alone at all. People often assume family crosses lines out of a misguided sense of love, but I came to learn that for my family, crossing lines had simply become the only way they knew how to hold me. It was a pattern I should have recognized immediately. I was not always this cautious. I used to believe boundaries were simple. You draw a line, and people respect it. But in my family, a line was just something to step over. Maybe that is why at 29 years old, I still flinched whenever my phone screen lit up with my mother Evelyn's name. Or when my father Thomas's voice slipped into that soft, guilt-laced tone he used whenever he wanted something quietly surrendered. Growing up, privacy was a pure fantasy. My bedroom door might as well have been made of cheap glass. My mother Evelyn walked in whenever she pleased. Sometimes she was humming a cheerful, distracting tune. Sometimes she was silent, always she was searching. She would pick up my notebooks, skim the pages, and ask questions masked as deep concern. "You hide too much," she would say, never stopping to consider why I felt the desperate need to hide in the first place. My father Thomas never interfered. He would shrug and mutter something about keeping the peace, then simply let her continue her intrusions. Meanwhile, my younger sister Liana lived like genuine royalty in a kingdom built from exceptions. Her room was strictly off-limits. Her mess was called creativity. Her mistakes were always framed as phases she was growing through. Mine, however, were warnings. Ours was a house with two separate sets of rules, one lenient and one suffocating. And I grew up knowing exactly which set belonged to me. So, when I finally moved out of that house and into my own space, I truly believed I had crossed some invisible threshold into adulthood. I bought my own dishes, arranged my bookshelf exactly the way I liked, and hung soft string lights that made the evenings feel calmer than anything I had ever known. I felt myself breathing differently there, slower and much deeper, as if my lungs finally trusted the air around them. But that hard-won peace did not last long. The very first time my mother let herself in, she acted as if it were a massive surprise visit, carrying bags of groceries she never asked if I wanted. She pulled an apron from her purse, her own purse, and started cooking dinner like she had been waiting all week for the chance. My father settled onto my tiny couch, claiming he just wanted to see the famous view, though his eyes kept drifting, scanning the counter where I left my mail. I told myself it was simply a misunderstanding. An overstep she would correct once I explained my need for separation. But explaining anything to my mother had never changed anything before. It did not now. Then came the smaller, creeping violations. Containers in the kitchen moved slightly out of place. Clothes I had not worn in months were suddenly clean in the laundry basket. A faint imprint lingered on my pillow. Once, my sister Liana borrowed a favorite sweater without asking, leaving traces of her makeup on the collar. My laptop screen was left open to tabs I did not recognize. Each incident on its own was small enough to reasonably excuse, but together they felt like a silent, inescapable tide rising slowly under my feet. I recognized the pattern immediately. I had lived it for 2 decades. Just like when I was a frustrated teenager, my mother called it love. My father called it protection, and I was supposed to call it normal. Except this time, it was not their house. It was mine. And deep down, I already sensed a terrible truth I was not brave enough to admit yet. If I did not stop them soon, they would take this place from me too. One unlocked door, One easy excuse, one intrusion at a time. I was determined to hold on to the denial, clinging to the idea that the intrusions were just accidental slips, clumsy attempts at showing care. But the slow, quiet shift had already begun. Like a deceptive draft, slipping through a window I thought was sealed shut. I would return from work and notice something barely off. A cabinet left slightly ajar. My collection of rare spices rearranged alphabetically. My neatly folded towels suddenly stacked with the edges facing outward instead of inward. They were harmless, microscopic things, all easy to dismiss. Yet, this was exactly how my mother Evelyn operated. She did not operate with storms, but with soft, persistent breezes that eventually became winds strong enough to push you back exactly into place. One Thursday evening, I returned to my apartment after a grueling 12-hour shift. I stood frozen in the entryway when I saw my refrigerator. It had been completely reorganized, structured exactly the way she used to arrange it at home. Fresh produce was on the top shelf, proteins were relegated to the middle, and any foods she deemed a temptation, my half-gallon of ice cream or the bag of kettle chips, were tucked deep behind everything else. The frozen meals I bought for busy weeks, which represented my adult efficiency and control, were all gone. In their place sat jars of her soups, her homemade dressings, her own personal preferences. It was a curated life, hers not mine. I stood there, with the cold air spilling out onto the floor, realizing I was not imagining any of this. It was not concern. I was being actively managed. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, recognizing the profound arrogance of the action. And then there was Liana. My younger sister treated my one-bedroom apartment like a bonus level in a video game she already owned. I would catch traces of her presence everywhere. I've mascara smudges near the bathroom mirror, half-finished iced coffee cups collecting moisture in my kitchen sink. Her discarded clothes tossed carelessly over the back of my desk chair. Her visits were frequent, unannounced, and always left a mess that felt like an invasion of my mental space. When I confronted her about it, demanding to know why she didn't call first, she would simply laugh it off, utterly dismissive. "Relax, Sienna," she would say, rolling her eyes. "You act like I'm a stranger." She always said it like I was the unreasonable one, like the problem was not her crossing lines, but me daring to want them respected at all. That line of argument was so familiar it made my teeth ache. The moment that finally snapped the last thread of denial, the point of no return, came 2 weeks later. I walked in after a long, draining day, longing for silence and the comfort of my own space, only to find my laptop open on the coffee table. The screen showed pages of notes I had not written, search results I definitely had not made, and multiple windows I never opened. It was a complete violation of my digital boundary. And then, as if to leave undeniable proof of the intrusion, one of my crucial work project drafts sat half-clicked on the desktop, as though someone had started reading the document but had gotten bored halfway through. My chest tightened until it hurt. This was not about soup or towels anymore. This was a direct interference with my livelihood and my private thoughts. I reached for my phone, my hand shaking slightly, and called my mother Evelyn. She picked up immediately, as if she had been waiting for the exact moment I arrived home. "Sweetheart, don't be dramatic," she said, her voice defensively smooth, when I asked if she had been there. I had not even finished the question. "Your landlord let me in. I told him you had not been answering me, and I was worried." She paused, allowing her tone to fill with righteous indignation. "Honestly, you should be grateful someone is looking out for you." Something inside me hardened, icing over completely. I managed to whisper the awful truth. "Mom, you lied to a third party to gain illegal entry into my home." "That is not lying, Sienna. It is concern," she insisted, her voice rising with familiar speed. "You work too hard. You isolate yourself. You clearly need support. The word support felt like a trap closing shut around me. After we hung up, I sat down hard on the hardwood floor, my back pressed against the front of the couch, letting the sheer weight of everything finally settle over me. Every memory from my childhood, the open journals, the monitored texts, the tracked locations, flooded back in one suffocating wave. This was not a new problem. This was the same relentless pattern, revived and emboldened. The internal conflict I had been running from felt suddenly inescapable. After the phone call, the weight of my childhood history and Evelyn's brazen lie about my stability pressed down on me. The next morning, I could not focus at work. My code was full of errors, my concentration was shot, and the image of my opened laptop kept flashing behind my eyelids. I realized I could no longer manage this on my own. I booked an emergency therapy session with Dr. Eleanor Vance during my lunch hour. The therapy office was calm, hushed, smelling faintly of lavender and old paper. A stark contrast to the buzzing chaos of my mind. Dr. Vance listened patiently, her gaze steady and neutral as I recounted the full timeline, the rearranged spices, the stolen meals, the casual invasions by Liana, and finally, Evelyn's devastating admission of lying to my landlord. I left nothing out. The guilt that I was reporting my own family warred with the desperate need to be seen and believed. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy and necessary. Dr. Vance leaned forward in her chair and spoke gently, choosing her words with clinical precision. Sienna, this isn't concern. This is enmeshment. The word struck me. Enmeshment. It was the first time someone had named the suffocating closeness I had always felt, but never had the language for. These aren't accidents, she continued softly. They're systemic boundary violations. I felt a profound, painful clarity wash over me. It was the first time in my 29 years that someone had articulated the true nature of my family dynamic. Naming the thing I had been too terrified to articulate myself. The problem was not that I was unreasonable, or that I was hiding too much. The problem was their behavior. Dr. Vance paused, letting the words sink in. She added the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Your home isn't safe, Sienna. Not emotionally. Not psychologically. She explained that attempts at setting boundaries would only escalate their efforts to regain control. Because they did not view me as a separate adult entity. You need distance. They can't override physical reality. I walked out of her office and onto the busy, cold Denver streets. The city air felt sharp and real. Her words echoed, repeating like a steady, urgent heartbeat. You need distance. They can't override. I realized she did not mean a conversation, or a firmer tone, or another doomed attempt at sitting them down to talk about respect. She meant escape. Real, physical, untraceable distance. The truth had finally settled inside me. The kind of truth that does not knock politely but barges straight through your chest. Staying in my current apartment, where the landlord was easily manipulated and the doors were easily breached, meant surrendering everything I had built. It meant letting them take this space from me, just as they had taken my privacy and my identity as a child. I knew then what I had to do. The avoidance, the minimizing, the fear. It all crystallized into a hard, cold resolve. I had to disappear. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I had to achieve the distance necessary for my psychological safety. I knew the coming days would be the hardest. But for the first time, I had a direction, not just a desperate hope. Once the truth settled, the hard, cold truth that Dr. Vance had articulated, I knew that staying meant absolute surrender. Her words, you need distance. They can't override, did not permit any conversation or compromise. They demanded escape. Real, physical, untraceable distance. So I did something I had never imagined doing. I sat down at my tiny kitchen table, opened my laptop, and typed 4 words into the search bar. Secure apartment buildings, Denver. Scrolling through the listings that evening, I realized how small my world had been. I had spent years believing privacy was a privilege other people enjoyed. But now, for the first time, privacy felt like something I could actively choose. A commodity I could purchase. I found a building downtown that advertised extensive security, keycard access only, a staffed lobby 24 hours a day, cameras covering every hallway, and elevators that required authorization just to move between floors. It was a place where no one, not even my charming mother Evelyn, could talk or trick their way inside. This building was clearly constructed for people who needed walls as much as they needed air. Scheduled a tour for the very next morning before work. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I knew. The lighting was warm and reassuring. The soft hum of the air vents was quiet, and the polished floors reflected the city lights in a serene pattern. It felt like a fortress, a space built entirely to protect its residents. The leasing agent showed me a corner unit with tall windows and a locked balcony, a view that belonged only to me. I stood there, imagining a silence that would be solely mine. I signed the lease before my long-held fear could convince me to back out. The move had to happen in absolute secrecy. There could be no chance for my mother to manipulate me with guilt. No space for my sister Lyanna to turn it into a public spectacle. It required swift, clean, irreversible action. I called my best friend Marcus, who works as a carpenter and understands the sanctity of structure and space. He listened without judgment as I laid out the plan. Marcus immediately offered to help. He and another friend, Chloe, showed up after midnight on Friday night, wearing hoodies and gloves, moving with the quiet precision of people planning a major haste. "Tell me again why we're whispering," Marcus murmured, his voice a low vibration, as he meticulously taped up the first box of books. "Because if they show up," I whispered back, focusing on packing the breakable items, "I won't be able to leave." We packed everything I owned. Clothes, books, kitchenware, every small piece of my life was quietly and methodically sealed away. I made sure to leave behind anything that felt too recognizable or that the family could claim ownership of later. I left the mugs my mother had bought, for my own good. The sweaters Lyanna claimed were hers until she felt generous, and the frames my father had insisted I hang to make the place feel like home. I wanted nothing they could possibly claim. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the moving truck rumbled softly outside my old building. We loaded my life into the dark trailer, each trip down the hallway feeling like a countdown to freedom. When the truck finally pulled away, carrying the physical weight of my autonomy, I locked the apartment door for the very last time. I then took the spare emergency key, the key my mother had once waved like a badge of her right to access, and slid it into an envelope addressed simply to the landlord. No explanation. No forwarding address. At the new building downtown, the night staff checked my ID, handed me a sleek, heavy black key card, and welcomed me by name. "Welcome home, Miss Sienna." That small, simple gesture, being welcomed into my own protected space, felt like a quiet revolution. As I stepped into the corner unit, the heavy door clicking shut behind me with a reassuring finality, one powerful line formed sharply in my mind. So I moved without telling them, not out of spite, not out of rebellion, but because disappearing was the only possible way to finally become visible to myself. After the quiet intensity of the move, the first 3 days in my new high-security apartment were profoundly, unbelievably silent. I kept my phone on silent mode, turned face down on the kitchen counter, letting the world shrink to the steady, comforting hum of the building's ventilation, the soft echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floors. The unfamiliar comfort of knowing every sound inside these walls came from me, and only from me. I was finally sleeping without jolting awake. I cooked meals without wondering who would inevitably rearrange my ingredients when I turned my back. It felt like breathing oxygen I had not realized I was missing for years. But peace, in my family's world, never lasted long. On the morning of day 4, a Sunday, the sheer stillness of the apartment became a pressure, demanding that I face the consequences of my disappearance. I finally flipped my phone over. The screen lit up like a frantic warning flare. Dozens of missed calls were stacked, frantic texts arriving with timestamps only minutes apart, and voicemails piled up one after the other. My mother Evelyn, my father Thomas, Liana. Even numbers I did not recognize. Likely neighbors from my old building who had been pressed into service. The texts ranged from panic to outright aggression. Sienna answer immediately. This isn't funny. Where are you? We are coming to your apartment. Call us right now. I scrolled through the messages, trying to slow my breathing, when I saw Liana's public post on social media. My sister is missing. Please pray she comes home. Missing. The irony of being declared missing, when I had finally found myself, almost made me laugh, but the longer I scrolled, the more I sensed this was not just standard parental panic. It was spiraling, frantic, and reckless. I set the phone back down, unable to stomach the cascade of manufactured drama. Just as I did, it rang again. The screen displayed, unknown number. Something deep inside me, a combination of dread and resolve, told me to pick up this one. Hello. I answered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hand. Is this Sienna Morgan? A calm, authoritative voice asked. Yes, this is she. This is Officer Ramirez with the Denver Police Department. Are you safe at the moment, Ms. Morgan? My stomach dropped with a sickening lurch, but the training from my therapist kicked in. Maintain composure. I am safe, officer. Thank you. I am calling because members of your family were involved in an incident at your former residence. She said carefully. We need you to come down to the station to verify a few details. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, the truth of their recklessness finally sinking in. What happened? They attempted to enter your old apartment, Ms. Morgan. The tenants inside believed it was a break-in. Of course they did. My family did not knock. And they certainly did not respect a simple locked door. They never had. The gravity of their action, committing a potential crime because they felt entitled to my location, amplified the necessity of my escape 100-fold. I will come right away, I said, disconnecting the call. The external conflict had now been formally ratified by law enforcement. I had moved to disappear, but my family's actions had forced me back into the light for a final, public confrontation. I had achieved physical distance. But the battle for emotional freedom was just beginning. I drove to the police station. I yielded the knowledge that my disappearance had escalated into an attempted break in solidifying my resolve. I mentally repeated the phrase that had become my mantra. My parents kept breaking into my apartment, so I moved without telling them, and I let them face the police. This was the consequence of their actions, not mine. When I entered the station, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the scent of stale coffee created a grim, sterile atmosphere. A receptionist directed me toward a small conference room. As I stepped inside, the scene hit me like a physical slap of reality. My mother Evelyn sat hunched over the table, her mascara smudged, tears leaving uneven streaks down her face. My father Thomas hovered stiffly beside her, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward the doorway as I appeared. My sister Liana paced restlessly in the far corner, her arms tightly folded, her face blotchy from crying. Or from being caught. It was hard to tell the difference. The moment my mother saw me, she gasped sharply, standing up so abruptly her metal chair screeched across the linoleum floor. Sienna! Oh my God, where have you been? We thought you were dead. Her voice trembled violently, projecting utter panic, but beneath the hysteria, I recognized something else. Accusation. As if my disappearance had been a calculated, personal attack against her. I did not move closer to comfort her, My voice was quiet, firm, and entirely devoid of emotion. I am fine. You shouldn't have been at my apartment. That's not your apartment anymore. My father muttered defensively, rushing to fill the silence. As if my leaving somehow justified their behavior. Officer Ramirez entered the room then, her presence calm and steady, commanding immediate respect. Let us all sit down, she instructed. My mother sniffled dramatically and collapsed back into her chair. Clutching a handful of tissues like theatrical props, I remained standing until the officer motioned me to take the seat, directly across the table from my family. Ms. Morgan. Officer Ramirez began, her tone measured. We need to clarify your whereabouts and well-being, because your family reported you missing. I was not missing. I stated clearly. I moved. You moved. My mother repeated, her voice cracking with wounded disbelief. Without telling us, without telling me. Her hurt tone would have gutted me once, but now it sounded like a familiar, desperate trap being sprung. Yes, I answered, keeping my response simple and factual. Leanna rolled her eyes from the corner, finally speaking. You are being ridiculous, Sienna. If you had just told us, none of this would have happened. Officer Ramirez cleared her throat, redirecting the attention. Let us revisit what did happen. According to the current tenants and multiple witnesses, your family attempted to force entry into a unit that was not theirs. That's a lie. My mother snapped instantly, her composure failing. We thought Sienna was inside. We were trying to save her, but climbing onto someone's private balcony. The officer asked evenly, her eyes focused solely on Evelyn. Leanna shifted uncomfortably, mumbling, I slipped. It wasn't like a break-in. My father rubbed his temple, his exhaustion showing. We were desperate, officer. Our daughter vanished. What were we supposed to think? You were supposed to respect her privacy. The officer replied, the words landing with quiet authority. She is an adult. Her absence is not a crime. The silence that followed was heavy and necessary. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my moment to establish the undeniable truth. I moved because you would not stop entering my home. Not once, but repeatedly. My mother's head went toward me, her tear-streaked face contorted. Only went inside to help you. You lied to my landlord to gain access. I reminded her, keeping my voice low but unwavering. You told him I was unstable, so he would let you in. She flinched visibly at the word lied, but quickly recovered, saying, I was worried. Worried enough to read my private things, to reorganize my home against my wishes, to give Leanna a key without my permission. I pressed. Leanna scoffed loudly. Oh, please. You act like I stole something. You stole my space. I corrected, looking directly at her, my safe place. The emotional intensity in the room was palpable. The years of guilt were dissolving, replaced by an unbreakable resolve. With the truth of the situation finally laid bare across the conference table, Officer Ramirez folded her hands professionally. The room had settled into an uncomfortable, necessary silence. Ms. Morgan. The officer began, addressing me while gesturing toward my parents. Would you like to formally document these boundary concerns? My mother Evelyn gasped dramatically, the sound sharp and wounded. Document. Officer, she is our daughter? And they are trespassers, Officer Ramirez replied calmly, her tone unwavering. Intentional or not, they caused an incident that required police intervention. The statement. The simple, objective application of the word trespassers hit my family harder than anything I had said. It stripped away all their excuses of love and concern, leaving only the clinical truth of their overreach. My father Thomas leaned forward slightly, his face etched with defeat and exhaustion. Sienna, come on. We made mistakes, but involving the police for family matters. You involved them, Dad. I said gently, looking him straight in the eye. Not me. I held my gaze. Allowing them to face the consequences of the law they had so recklessly brought down upon themselves. Officer Ramirez then slid a printed form across the table, tapping it lightly. Given the circumstances, I recommend a written boundary agreement. It is not a restraining order. But it formally documents the expectations moving forward, should future incidents arise. My mother stared at the document as if it were a death sentence, her lower lip trembling. I knew this was the pivotal moment. The moment I had to dictate the new terms of our relationship. I kept my voice steady, professional, and entirely detached from the history between us. Here are my terms. 3 simple lines. I listed them slowly, deliberately, giving them no room for argument. 1. You will not come to my new home, ever. 2. We will only meet in neutral, public places. 3. You do not access my personal belongings, my accounts, or my mail, ever. My father frowned deeply. That's extreme, Sienna. No. I replied softly, shaking my head. It is adulthood. For a long moment no one moved. They were frozen in the realization that the world no longer bent to their rules. Their system of enmeshment and control had finally met an unbreachable wall. Slowly, reluctantly, my father took the pen. With the reluctance of a man admitting defeat, he signed. My mother followed, her signature shaky and blurred by residual tears. Liana signed last. Her eyebrows were tight and her jaw was set. But I saw a flicker of understanding finally dawning in her expression. The embarrassment and the consequence had matured her more than years of my lectures ever could. When the signed paper slid back to me, the ink shimmering slightly in the harsh overhead light, something inside my chest untangled. A knot of guilt and fear that had been twisted tight for nearly 30 years. My mother whispered, her voice barely audible. I miss when you needed us. I calmly gathered the papers, folding them neatly. You can still be in my life, Mom, I told her. You just can't be in my home. Officer Ramirez nodded approvingly. As I turned and walked out of the police station, leaving my parents and sister sitting at the cold table, the cool Denver air wrapped around me like a clean, fresh slate. I felt something profound. Something I had not felt in a very long time, freedom earned, chosen and finally undeniable. The days following the police station confrontation felt unusually, profoundly quiet, as if the entire world had finally stopped pressing against my skin. In my new apartment, the mornings were slow and gentle. I would open the blinds and let the Denver sunlight spill across the clean hardwood floors, a powerful reminder that this space, this hard-won peace, belonged entirely to me. There were no unexpected footsteps, no rearranged spices, and no lingering fear that someone had crossed a line while I was gone. My family kept their distance, just as they agreed to on paper. We met only in neutral, specified places, usually a quiet cafe near Union Station, where the small tables and the bustling public setting made the boundaries unmistakable. My mother Evelyn arrived carefully now. As if stepping into a room where the rules had fundamentally changed, and she was unsure which ones applied to her anymore. My father Thomas listened more than he spoke, and Liana, surprisingly, seemed to have genuinely softened. The profound embarrassment of facing the police had achieved a level of maturity in her that years of lectures never could have. None of us pretended things were perfect, or that the old wounds had instantly vanished. But for the first time, they treated my space, both emotional and physical, as something real and valid. And as the weeks passed, I felt myself expanding into the life I had pushed aside for years. I breathed deeper. I slept fully. I existed without needing to brace for any kind of impact. Sometimes I learned, healing is not loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the sound of a locked door staying locked. Looking back, leaving was never the punishment they had always assumed it was. It was the first time I chose myself, without any apology, and the action defined my independence forever. My family still exists in my life, just at a healthy distance that finally allows me to breathe. And if you have ever had to fight for your own space, For the basic right to feel safe in the place you call home. Know that you are not alone.